Competency-based language teaching is an application of the principles of competency-based education to language teaching, where the focus is the outcomes or outputs of learning. By the end of 1970, competency-based language teaching was mostly used in work-related and survival-oriented language teaching programs for adults. Competency-based language teaching focuses on what learners are expected to do with the language, and can be described as defining educational goals in terms of precise, measurable description of the knowledge, skills, and behaviors students should possess at the end of a course of study.
An element of competency can be defined as any attribute of an individual that contributes to the successful performance of a task, job, function, or activity in an academic setting and/or a work setting. The major basis of this approach is the functional interactional perspective on the nature of language, which means that the language learning always needs to be connected to the social context it is used in. Therefore, the language is seen as a medium of interaction and communication between people who want to achieve specific goals and purposes. In connection to this, CBLT shares a behaviorist view of learning that certain life encounters call for certain kinds of language. Along with language, the so-called mosaic approach to language learning is included, which assumes the language can be divided into appropriate parts and subparts.
The role of the teacher in a competency-based framework is not defined by specific terms. The teacher has to provide positive and constructive feedback in order to help the students to improve their skills. He needs to be aware of the learner's needs so that everybody feels welcome in the class. The role of the learner in a competency-based framework is to decide whether the competencies are useful and relevant for him. This shows that the learner has an active role in the classroom, which is underlined by the fact that the students are expected to perform the skills learned. The materials are mainly sample text and assessment tasks. These materials are used to provide the students with the essential skills, knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors required for effective performance of a real-world task or activity. A great variety of competencies should be improved by this task. Competency-based language teaching is designed not around the notion of subject knowledge, but around the notion of competency. Therefore, the focus is on how the students can use the language instead of their own knowledge about the language.
The most common objectives are teaching a set of outcomes derived from the analysis of tasks typically required of students in live role situations, and enabling students to become autonomous individuals capable of coping with the demands of the real world.
At the beginning of a course, the students have to go through an initial assessment in which the teacher determines the current proficiency level of the student. After this, the students are grouped based on their current English proficiency level, their learning pace, their needs, and their social goals for learning English. The learning activities used can be described as systematically designed activities to achieve a certain competence. These activities are real-world tasks which may be related to any domain of life, but specifically to survival-oriented and work-related situations in a new environment.
The activities are: 1. Systematic, there is a specific goal in mind. 2. Repetitive, students learn by doing, not by memorizing the rules, so repetition is essential. 3. Measurable, the success of the activity is easy to measure. This approach also gives student-centered instructions in content, level, and pace. Objectives are defined in terms of individual need. Instructions are not time-based. Students progress at their own rate and concentrate on ability for which they lack competence. Assessment of students' performance is best accomplished under actual conditions. However, this approach is very expensive and usually not feasible. Most learners are assessed using multiple choice tests, simulations, games, etc. Within CBLT, global errors are common. These hinder communication and prevent the learners from comprehending some aspect of the message. Errors which are corrected by feedback or self-correction. The competency are specific and practical and can be seen to relate to the learner's needs and interests. The competencies that will be taught and tested are specific and public. The competency can be mastered once at a time so the learners can see what has been learned and what still remains to be learned. Taking this advantage into account, this approach carries heightened assumptions about reality and social order. It is value-governed in, that is, imposes its own norms. In addition, teaching over behaviors seems mechanical, inhibiting critical thinking. Among the real-world abilities considered in this approach, there are found the ability to give a message or respond to an offer to take a message, the ability to express opinions politely following the target language, conventional cultural norms.
There are both critics and supporters of the competency-based language teaching. It is very difficult to develop a list of competencies for every specific situation. This is due to the fact that many areas in which people need certain competencies are impossible to operate.